This video, and I make no pretense whatsoever that there is even an intention to make this video short, will be on the subject of conflict and combat in Fantasy Flight Games, Star Wars role-playing game. As an overview of all the things which come together to make combat in this game what it is, it will have a sense of an instructional video or a how-to video, but the purpose is really to supply observations on the combat system. And the idea behind that is to help people who are struggling with understanding or accepting how the game works to get their heads around it and maybe see a little differently how they can have fun with this game. Or for people who are getting no sense of Star Wars in applying the system, how maybe they can get there. That's the hope. Well, conflict and combat. I think a lot of people, when they pick up a new game, the chapter or the section dealing with combat is one of their first stops. Now, as we said in the review on the channel of the game, this is one game where it really behooves the game master and the players to start reading at page 1 and go through to the end, reading everything in order, in sequence, only skipping the Game Master chapter and possibly the Adversaries chapter and the adventure if you're a player. Otherwise, read it from cover to cover. It will present itself in its best and most easily understood light in that way. Now, Conflict and Combat, Chapter 6 in all 3 of the core books, follows that same approach. That chapter opens up with its description of narrative versus structured gameplay, which we've already talked about in an earlier video, and then moves into the sequence of conducting a combat. Now, we've looked at that sequence already a little when we did the space combat video, but I wanted to save the focus on it for this video. I saved it a little longer than I intended, but you know, sometimes you have to run off to take a bite. So, let's begin. The entirety of combat in the game is handled in Chapter 6 and Chapter 7, but in order to make sense out of it, you do need to understand the dice and character options, such as talents, wound thresholds, and whatnot, before you really get into it. So, again, start there and then move into this chapter. So, Chapter 6 deals with narrative and structured gameplay, as I said. Then it describes and lists maneuvers, describes and lists actions, details how defense works and how it's different from soak. These are just small little sections. It's not a lot to have to wade through. They're just concepts presented in order. So defense, then soak, range bands, maybe one of the most challenging aspects of combat if you're used to using miniatures or very specific measurements of range between characters. Additional combat modifiers, environmental effects, then we get into wounds and strain and the possible conditions for a character. Finally, recovery and healing. That's Chapter 6. Once you've got that down, you can move into Chapter 7, which is starship and vehicle combat, where it follows the same sequence, the same pattern, same format, but there are some slight changes made to it to represent ships being shot and shooting instead of characters being shot and shooting. This video is going to focus on the material in Chapter 6, Conflict and Combat. The space combat video has already explored everything I wanted to talk about from Chapter 7. And as we've already explored narrative and structured gameplay in its own video, we can open up with maneuvers. Now, characters will have one free maneuver during their turn. Now, maneuvers are things like aiming, moving, drawing or holstering a weapon, stuff like this. Things that basically affect or provide some sort of advantage to your character, as contrasted with an action which has broader effects on the world around them, such as making an attack. Now, you have one free maneuver, and you have one action. You can get more maneuvers. You can do so by taking strain, or you can be awarded an extra maneuver, maybe as an out-of-turn incidental, by tremendous enemy failure, or using a signature ability if you are a high-level explorer. There are ways to get other maneuvers. You really won't find that you'll have the opportunity to do more than 2 unless you are that high-level explorer with the signature ability Unmatched Mobility. Generally speaking, you will have the opportunity to take 2 maneuvers and maybe be awarded a few, if that's how it goes, if it's appropriate to the scene, as out-of-turn maneuvers. Finally, another source of additional maneuver is to exchange your action for one. But always keep in mind that the cap of 2 maneuvers per turn is a really hard one. Unless you have unmatched mobility, or unless you are receiving maneuvers as a result of spending enemy threats or despair, then 2 maneuvers are really all you're going to be able to manage. And there is no way to exchange maneuvers for additional actions, which is a mistake you sometimes see out there. All right. So 1 action, 2 maneuvers. If you exert or in some other way earn that additional maneuver. The typical combat turn for your character, however, will have 1 maneuver and 1 action. Let's just go through the maneuvers quickly. They are aim, which confers a bonus to a ranged attack that you make. There is assist, which allows you to confer a bonus on an ally whom you're helping with their action. Guarded stance, which confers a bonus in the form of a penalty to attackers against you. Then we get into a different type of maneuver. It's like a catch-all, what I think of as a category of maneuvers. The first one is interact with the environment. This is stuff like moving an item, opening a door, taking cover. Remember, maneuvers are things which affect the situation of your character much more than they affect the world around them. That's the realm of actions, like making an attack. So interacting with the environment makes things better for you, basically, like opening a door or closing a door. And so that one happens a lot. And it's important to note that as a player, you don't say, I interact with the environment. You just describe what you're doing. The interact with environment maneuver is there as a category so that the game master can quickly learn what things qualify as a maneuver rather than an action. What things are simple enough or character focused enough to count as a maneuver rather than as an action. So don't say, I interact with the environment, or I perform the move a large item maneuver. Just describe as well and as entertainingly as you can what it is your character is doing, and let the game master decide whether that was interacting with the environment or not. All right, the next one is manage gear. This is also a category. This is things like drawing or holstering your weapon, or getting like a grenade out of a bag, that sort of thing. Then there's mount or dismount a vehicle or beast. Then move covers range changes, and specifically it deals with engagement in melee combat. Following this is drop prone or stand, and this is something where you can confer another defensive bonus by applying a penalty to ranged attackers, but this comes at the cost of making yourself more vulnerable to melee attackers when you drop prone. If you've been knocked prone, or if you have been prone and need to get up, you also use this maneuver, stand. The last one you don't hear about much. This is called preparation. This is kind of like aim for things which are not ranged attacks. If you're doing something dangerous, if you're doing something that needs concentration, you can represent that in the game by taking the preparation maneuver. All right, that's it for maneuvers. It's not a lot, but they are very broad. And One more time, the purpose is not to say, I manage gear. The purpose is always, whether actions or maneuvers, to be describing how the character is interacting, what the character is doing to protect themselves, and so on. Before moving on to actions, let's stop a moment and focus on the move maneuver. And move is all about range, and range, as we've discussed in earlier videos, is an abstract concept in this game. It's not tied to a hard-coded specific distance in meters, for example, between characters. It's a relationship. How can the characters affect each other? Can they hear each other when they're communicating? Are they too far apart? Can they hit each other with their weapons, whatever they might be? So the range bands are short, medium, long, and extreme. And to travel between each band has a cost in move maneuvers. The farther you want to go, obviously the more maneuvers need to be spent. They don't all have to be spent together. They can stack up over a series of turns as you're traveling a long distance. Say you're having a long running firefight through a hangar bay. The characters are at one end and their escape route is at long range. They need to spend a series of maneuvers to get there. They don't all have to happen in the same turn. So changing range. To go from short range to medium or medium to short takes one maneuver, one move. To move from medium to long takes two. To move from long to extreme takes two. So in our example of the PCs in a running firefight, say they're exiting their ship at one end of the hangar bay and have to, exchange shots as they travel the long range from the ship to the door, they'll have to spend 3 maneuvers. Short to medium, medium to long. Right? Simple enough. It's a movement cost. The next item is engaged. Now this is a subset of short range, and this is used for melee combat, either unarmed or with knives, blades, lightsabers, what have you. Engaged is really more of a condition than it is a range band, but it is a requirement for certain types of attacks, such if you want to use your lightsaber or you want to use your vibro knife, you need to be engaged with the target. And it costs a maneuver. So if characters were at medium range to each other, changing a range band costs 1 maneuver to go from medium to short, so they spend that. Now they're still not engaged, so if this is to be a knife fight, they still can't attack each other. One of them needs to spend a maneuver to engage with the other, which doesn't mean they're suddenly stuck that way. The other combatant can spend their own maneuver to disengage. You may wonder, why is this necessary? Why do we need a subcategory of short to represent melee combat? And it's really about the fear and the difficulty of applying violence to that body in front of you. You can't simply walk up and stick them with a knife. Right? This represents the effort taken to ensure that you are in a position to force your opponent to fight with you. It doesn't turn into a race around the hangar bay. Come back here so I may stab you. You're engaged. You've gotten in so close that they must deal with you. It's that kind of thing. They can disengage. They can outclass you in their maneuvering, or they can stay engaged, defend themselves, attack. It's that sort of thing. Now, in the same way that a melee weapon, such as a vibro axe, requires the attacker to be engaged with the defender, ranged weapons also have a requirement: their range. So if you're using, like Han Solo, a heavy blaster pistol, this is a medium range weapon. There is a fair bit of confusion on this point, I feel. This is a weapon that you can use in the short range band and the medium range band. It's not for shooting targets at long range. It's a pistol with the medium range requirement, medium or less. Now there are talents out there which can allow you to boost the range of a weapon, which would allow you to shoot a target successfully at long range with this. Now, in the beginning of the Make a Ranged Attack section of the sequence in combat, you will find information about the difficulty to hit targets at range, which I think leads to this confusion. Now, if you have a rifle which has a long range, it can be used at short range, medium range, or long range. And you determine the difficulty for hitting using this table. Short range is easy, 1. Medium, 2. Average. Long, 3. Extreme, 4. Daunting. That's how the range bands work. If you have a weapon that's capped at medium, then you won't be hitting at long without some modification or without some talent that enables you to go beyond. On a related note, throwing grenades. This is a short range action unless you have the specific talent, strong arm, which allows you to extend that into the medium range band. So to recap about ranges, ranges are all about the relationship between things in the scene. They're not about a set or codified distance between 2 points in space. This game abstracts distance in this way. Rather than supplying a long and detailed list of minutiae about the exact range of this weapon compared to the exact range of that weapon, things are categorized together into the range bands. This increases the speed of the system. It increases the speed of character creation and gear selection, which is always welcome. And it enables the exact same decision. At the end of the day, the exact same decision is made. Can I or can I not hit that target with this weapon? Having it listed out in meters or having it listed as medium accomplishes the same goal. I have from time to time online encountered some pushback on the concept of range being a requirement in the same way that engaged is. I feel that this is very clear in the text. There are others who disagree, and they cite Table 6.1 as their evidence that you can hit at whatever range just by raising the difficulty. I have zero interest in arguing with people online, but if you're right now preparing a comment to add to this video saying that this is not correct or that your group handles it differently, okay, just please consider the weapon descriptions, right? The weapon characteristics entry in the core rules state this clearly about range. That's what it's for. It's to show you the limit of how far you can fire your weapon. And the sniper shot talent, it wouldn't exist if anyone could shoot beyond the listed range of their weapon, and it certainly wouldn't exist in its written form where it raises the difficulty even higher. So any normal person can fire their medium range weapon at long using the difficulty on Table 6.1, but if you're a sniper and specifically trained at shooting over long distances, for you can extend the range of your weapon, and it's even harder than for the normal guy. See, it doesn't track, it doesn't make sense. The listed range is the maximum range of the weapon. Anyway, let's move on to actions. If combat were a meal, I suppose actions would be the meat of them, the things that you get to do to the other guy. There aren't as many in the list, but the palette of actions that you can take is no less colorful or broad than maneuvers. So let's quickly go over the types of actions. First thing, as we mentioned earlier, you can exchange your action for a maneuver. Right? Rather than affecting the other guy, you can take another maneuver, run farther, that sort of thing. Now, a side note to this is that there are some talents which allow you to classify one of your actions as a maneuver. So as you move down through the talent tree of your specialization inside your career, you get better and better at specific actions, and sometimes you get good enough at iconic ones that it's no longer an action for you, it's a maneuver. So that's kind of cool. So that's one category of action. You can spend an action to activate an ability. For example, and they also list it separately so there's no confusion, activating a force power or using one of your active talents. This is an action. Now the active talent description will explain exactly what you can do. So some people might be confused, says, well, I can spend an action to activate an ability, but that, according to the text, uses my action, so then I can't actually use that ability. But no, the text of the talent details you using that ability, so don't get confused there. So you can activate one of your talents or your abilities, you can activate a force power, you can do a skill check, and a specialized form of skill check is the combat check, and that's the focus of this video. So let's talk about the sequence of combat. The sequence of combat is a boon to someone who is just starting to learn the game. If you already have some experience with role-playing games, then there's nothing new here. It's just nice to see it broken down into clear steps. When a game designer takes the time to do this, it shows that they have a really clear grasp of what a combat scene entails and are taking the time to explain it in its discrete pieces so that you can learn it and remember it quickly. And very soon you won't be thinking about this as a sequence. You'll just be thinking, you won't really be thinking about this at all. When a combat erupts, you'll be using the dice, you'll be describing everything, and you'll be going through the motions without going step 1, step 2. Don't worry about it. So combat starts when someone declares an attack and selects a target. Then, once the modifiers for this have been established, such as environmental effects like smoke or darkness, cover, range, then you assemble the dice pool. You need to know the modifiers first because the modifiers are represented with dice. You assemble the dice pool, then you roll them. Sort them. Separate all the canceled dice so that all that is left are the active dice, the ones that you're going to be interpreting the result from. Now, in a combat check, this is specifically focused on doing damage, but there are special effect considerations from the advantages, the triumphs, the threats, and the despair. So your focus here is dealing damage. So first, categorize how much damage might be done as a base. Then you move on to resolving your advantages and triumphs. These are resolved first. Use the advantages to determine whether or not you're going to assign a crit, or if you're going to activate a weapon or item quality, that sort of thing. Once those are taken care of, if there are any, then you check for threats or despair. If there are any, you take care of those. And this leads you finally to being able to make your decision about how that damage you're trying to deal has been affected, either by having a crit be activated or something along those lines. And then you determine the effect of that damage on the target. So you apply the damage to the target, they get to soak it, which reduces it, and you check the wound threshold to determine the effect and apply any critical injuries. Okay, so while we're at this step, reducing damage, applying to wound threshold, and applying critical injuries, it's time to talk about two things. One is description, and the second thing is role-playing. Let's look at description first. When we get to this part of resolving the combat check, what we're dealing with is a number. And whenever you have damage as a number, the temptation comes of just saying the number. And that's fine. You're going to have to say the number. There's no, colorful descriptive term to apply saying, oh, I've done an aggravated wound, or oh, look, I've done an extreme wound, something like that. You're just getting a number. So 9, let's say. You've inflicted, or you're about to inflict, 9 wounds. So each point is a wound. And before we move into step 6, where the target gets involved, we're dealing with a potential wounds, right? Armor adds to their soak, and their soak is also a value. So this is not a roll-off like in some games where I roll to see how much damage I can do, and then you roll to see how much damage you can take, and then these affect each other. I roll, I wind up with a damage total, and your soak is subtracted from that total. If I get a number larger than 0, your wound threshold is decreased by that same amount. It's pretty simple. But this means that we're exchanging a lot of numbers across the table. It's the gamiest part of the game. It's important to remember that you still need to describe. It's important to remember that one turn in Fantasy Flight Games, Star Wars role-playing, is not one discrete action. It's not just a single shot. It's not one thrust or cut of a knife or a lightsaber. It's an exchange. It's a moment in time. Be creative. Remember the hallway shootout on Bespin in Empire, right? Rapid exchanges. Remember the detention tunnel where they have to go down into the trash compactor. Shoot. There's rapid fire exchange of shots, right? All of these things are affecting your character. Where does the damage come from? It's not just being shot. It's the exertion. It's the flashes of heat, the sparks, throwing yourself behind cover. Any possible interaction with the environment is speaking to where this damage comes from. Now, it might just be one shot, but it doesn't have to be. It doesn't really represent that. It's not zoomed in to that level. It's abstracted out to give you the ability to fill the space with your dreams of Star Wars, right? Go for it. You cannot go beyond what the dice tell you. But inside that canvas delineated by the dice results, you can paint anything you can imagine. Go for it. Enjoy it. Don't let the mechanical nature of exchanging numbers get in the way of sparking imaginative visions in the people that you play with. That's your job. You're trying to add color to what they're imagining. Now here's the other thing. The dice are not rolled behind a Game Master screen. The dice are not rolled separately in front of each player. They're pooled together, and you'll notice that everybody leans in across the table to interpret the results or see what they are. The players getting the responsibility to talk about the positive results, and the Game Master getting the responsibility to talk about the negative results. Everybody leans in. Everybody can see. Unless there is someone in your group who, for visual reasons or just the way they think, they have difficulty counting up what the damage value is, it's not even really necessary to say what the rolled damage is. Eventually, people will become familiar enough with what the base damage of your weapon is and whatever talents you might be adding to it, or mods or whatever. It could be possible to run this without actually saying the number, but then you'll probably have someone somewhere needing to talk about the soak value of the target in one direction or the other. It's not necessary to avoid saying numbers. It is possible to avoid saying numbers once you get very familiar with specific characters. So Star Wars is not really a game where we're hiding a lot of NPC detail. It moves faster if people can set up the dice pools quickly and people can interpret the results meaningfully from there. So you don't really need to hide the armor value. Maybe you'll want to, but anyway, focus on creating a description from the result. Never forget that step, even if you find yourself exchanging numbers. Then go on after you've exchanged the number to talk about the result. Okay. The second side note was role-playing, and this is, well, you've taken damage. Your character has taken damage. What does that really mean? Until you cross the character's wound threshold, there are no mechanical penalties assigned to the character. You might take a condition from an item quality such as Disoriented. But as the character takes wounds, their ability to act is not impacted mechanically. But when you cross over the wound threshold, the character's ability to act is most definitely impacted. They can't. They're not taking actions and they're not taking maneuvers. The way the character's status is described is as unconscious. Now, while you're free to interpret that as meaning unable to interact with the scene in a meaningful way, meaning, perhaps they're conscious as they're being carried toward medical assistance or something along those lines. Really, when you cross over the wound threshold, you are out of the combat until someone can deal with your injury. Now, I bring this up together because this is where role-playing comes in. You are not required to role-play an injury. You are not required to suffer any kind of wound penalty as you work your way up toward crossing over the wound threshold. But damage is being applied to the character. What does it mean? Is it something that can enter into your description, right? Something to remember for later. All the wounds that your character takes during a combat, these need to be healed, or at least require a period of recuperation before they go away. These are things that have actually affected the character. They're just not applying some sort of mechanical indicator that the character is suffering from pain or shock or what have you. That's on you. All of those descriptive elements, they're on you, the player, and on the shoulders of the game master to bring out. Not just let it be a number marked temporarily on a character sheet or entered into your tablet or whatever it is that you're using to store your character information. It needs to enter into the scene in a real and descriptive way to raise the stakes. Right. What if, when Leia is shot on Endor, we don't see it? Right. So she gets shot, and then she's leaning up against the bunker, right? Just chatting away as if there were no problem. No description of injury, no sense that she has been burned by high-energy blaster fire, no sense that she is struggling to retain consciousness or any of those things. It's just, a script note. Leia gets shot, and it's never mentioned again. Right? Imagine it were like that, but it's not. Right? Carrie Fisher gives us the sense that she is tough, strong, she's in pain, but her focus is on getting them out of that situation. We can compare and maybe contrast this with when Luke's hand is cut off and how capable he is of acting and interacting with his environment and with other characters at that time. Luke is slipping in and out of consciousness and needs to be rescued. So keeping these two things in mind can give us some guidance about how we should role play injuries, non-mechanically hampering injuries inside our wound threshold. Talking about pain, we're talking about multiple small injuries, we're talking about the exertion that causes pain within the body. Not the type of exertion or fatigue or stress that's represented by strain, but the kind that's caused by battery, by explosions, by pushing too hard, too fast, and of course by getting shot or stabbed or blown up. Always keeping in mind that crossing the wound threshold is not dying. This is crossing over into significant, life-altering, critical effect dealing injury. So I present these two side notes as a way to get more out of the game and get more in tune with the game. remembering to not be distracted or limited by the parts of the system that rely on exchanging numbers. And remembering that even if there's no mechanical penalty being applied, there's still injury being represented in what we are narrating, what's a part of the fiction of the scene we are creating. So giving into that, going with that, will enhance and enrich the experience. It's not a way to sabotage yourself. You have taken the injury. Describe it. Suck the marrow out of the broken bones of this scene. Okay, now back to damage. Damage is another thing where I see a lot of questions about this online, and I've received a lot of questions about it myself. How does damage actually work? See, in some systems, you need to pay one of your successes in order to hit, and any extra successes beyond that one needed to hit are used to boost or even determine what the damage is. This is not one of those systems. Every uncancelled success is added to the base damage of the weapon. Simple. Everything is kept to its fastest possible expression in this system. So, like I've said before, while it doesn't make combat particularly fast, they do everything they can to prevent it from being slow. It's got a good stately pace to it, one where you can bring out all of the cool visuals of a Star Wars film in your description. So I have a weapon that has a damage code of 5. I roll 3 successes. 2 of those successes are canceled, leaving me with 1 success. That 1 success tells me that I hit, and it ups my damage from 5 to 6. Done. Simple. So that's damage. Soak is similar. This is the character's capacity to avoid or in some way prevent or baffle or armor themselves against incoming injury. It's a combination of all those things that go into not being shot or reducing the severity of a shot or being so tough you don't care you got shot or being so well armored you're protected against the shot or some combination thereof. Right? So the incoming damage is applied. Let's say it's the one I used before. Let's say it's 9. Let's say the target has a soak of 5. That's 4 wounds, which are then applied to the target's wound threshold. They have been injured by the attack in some way. And you, the players, are free to narrate what that way is. Did they, bruise themselves by throwing themselves behind cover? Did they roll down a flight of stairs? They didn't get shot, but they rolled down a flight of stairs, or what have you. Did they throw themselves out of the way so violently that they slammed into the wall and racked their head and now they're seeing stars? This sort of thing. They have taken injury. They do require healing. They don't necessarily need to have been shot for those 4 wounds, but maybe in many cases that will be the easiest way to represent it. So while we're talking about damage and soak, it's important to slip in a note about minions, specifically minion groups. The wound threshold for a minion group is determined by, the number of minions that are in the group. The example in the core book is for stormtroopers. Right? 3 stormtroopers. Each stormtrooper has a wound threshold of 5. That means this group has a wound threshold of 15. When you're making attacks and when you're defending against incoming attacks from a minion group, you're making an attack on the group, and the group is making attacks on you. Right? This speeds up play by reducing the number of die rolls and the number of damage rolls and whatnot. Let's say you make an attack and you end up doing 10 damage after soak is dealt with. Okay? Now that minion group of 3 stormtroopers, they have a 15 wound threshold. You've just taken 10 from the wound threshold of that group. Now, each stormtrooper has 5. You did 10. Your attack for your turn has taken out 2 of the stormtroopers. So again, this goes into understanding that combat in this game is not one roll, one shot. Right? You, over the course of your action, produced an amount of damage And that amount of damage was sufficient enough to take out 2 of the 3 opponents in that group against you. But to speed all of this up, to abstract it so it works quickly, we handle it this way. It has a wound threshold of 15, this group does, and every time you do 5, one of the stormtroopers is out of the combat. They might be stunned, they might be too hurt to continue, they might be cowardly and fleeing, they might be dead. That depends on the scene. That doesn't matter. But every time you do enough damage to cross the individual wound threshold of a member of a minion group, then one of them is taken out. So if I had managed to do 15 in my attack, then all 3 stormtroopers are down as a result of my attack. If I do 4, none of them are. If I do 5, one of them is. 6, one of them is. 7, 8, 9, one of them is. 10, 2 of them are down. So damage from minion groups is higher than what a minion can inflict themselves, and this is because you're under a barrage of fire. Damage on a minion group basically is designed to help you process the group in a single turn, but still allow you the granularity of individual troopers falling over time. As we discussed on the channel during our review of Fantasy Flight Games Star Wars role-playing, there are certain things that are going on with the mechanics to speed up play. Minion groups are one expression of that. They not only connect through the mechanics to the genre by allowing the game master to set up large numbers of opposing forces, exactly like we see in the films, but it also allows us to do that while compressing the mechanical parts of that need to take place at the table. Imagine if you have a squad of 10 stormtroopers chasing your smuggler down a hallway of an Imperial installation, and they're firing back and forth, and you have to roll individual hit and damage for each trooper. Rolling a lot of dice can be fun. Rolling a lot of kind of identical dice over and over and over and over again in one turn, to do that again the next turn, to do that again in the next turn, will really slow down the passage of time in the game and, again, focus narration on single actions which are met with success or failure. And this works against a group trying to capture the mood of Star Wars. And combat is one of those things that people identify as something cool they want to do in Star Wars, so that has to be fun too. To help focus on that fun, to help focus on bringing out the cool aspects of Star Wars, the game system focuses on what the characters are doing, what the players are having them do. So you build your pool based on actions you're taking. This is the slow and focused part of the turn. So damage and damage resolution, this is the fast part of the turn. It's made quick by having it not involve any additional rolling. The successes you have in your attack roll for that turn simply add to the base damage of the weapon, and the soak of the target is subtracted. Now, what does soak represent in terms of description and how we interact with the mechanics to make it feel like Star Wars and make it feel dramatic and fun? We have a mathematical figure, which we subtract another mathematical figure to get a total, and then we share the total. Just seems like subtraction, not a whole lot of fun or coolness. Well, again, that's on us. The number of successes you generate, which adds to the damage, this represents how hard your character was trying to take out the other character, how well they hit, how strong their attack is, how accurate their attack is, how dangerous and deadly their attack is. Play it up. Soak is the character's toughness. It's their actual resistance to damage. It's drawn from their brawn characteristic. How big, how burly are they? And it's also drawn from their armor. These two traits are added together into one total. Again, with the idea of making it fast. So we don't have to deal with a separate soak and separate armor stage. And these are sort of passive characteristics. Being tough and having armor on. It's not an action that the character is doing. So it's relegated down to a simple mathematical process, which we are still responsible for describing and making cool. This is how resistant your character is to damage. This is the quality of their armor, right? They may have been shot in the chest, but they don't take any damage, or they take less damage than the spindly little explorer standing next to them. That kind of stuff. But like I said, this is passive. There is another quality, an active quality, and that's called defense. Defense basically comes in three similar flavors. It's kind of like Neapolitan ice cream. It's all ice cream. It's all defense. But there's general defense, there's melee defense, and there's ranged defense. If you have general defense, that's great. It applies against all incoming attacks. If you have melee defense, that's what it applies to, hand-to-hand combat or with melee weapons. And if you have ranged defense, it's used when people are shooting at you. You can't mix and match them. Unlike armor, where you can benefit from different types of armor source to add together, to add to your soak, such as you have plating implanted, dermal plating implanted in your body, and you wear armor. These two things will stack together. If you're trying to wear two suits of stormtrooper armor, they don't stack together. But defense, because they are categories, like general applying to any sort of attack, melee applying only to melee attacks, ranged applying only to ranged attacks, there can be a little confusion there. So if you have a general defense of 1 and a ranged defense of 2, and you're being shot at, you choose ranged defense because it's higher. Those two things don't stack together. If your character is firing on a highly skilled or capable character, or one who has a significant gear advantage, you might be facing a character who has defense of some kind. For every rating in defense, like defense 1, a setback die is added to the difficulty of trying to hit them. If they have general defense 2, then any sort of attack sent their way is penalized by having 2 setback dice applied to their attack roll. If they have melee defense 1 and range defense 2, and this is a melee attack, then they add that 1 for melee defense to the knife fighter's attack against them. If someone is shooting at them, they add 2 setback die to the attack. So it's pretty simple. Just add the number in setback dice to any roll to attack that character. As I mentioned earlier, defense is more of an active consideration than soak is. Soak and armor are passive in that they represent a characteristic or quality condition of the character, whereas defense is more a representation of things that they have learned how to do, things that they are doing, or is an active quality about the gear that they're using, such as a specific type of armor or a personal shield, that sort of thing. So on talent trees and in career specializations, toward the end of that tree, you'll start to see characters being able to, in some cases, in some careers, earn some sort of defense, melee or ranged. And gear will supply a general defense. So that last point can sometimes cause confusion. When first looking at armor or looking at it very quickly in the heat of battle, you can read the entry in the first armor section in gear and see an armor's defense does this. But armor has 2 qualities. It has 2 item qualities, defense and soak. Its soak rating adds to the character's soak, and its defense rating, if any, adds setback dice to the attack against it. Not all suits of armor have both. Some have one, some have the other. Defense is fairly hard to come by. It's not that common. It's more associated with ships and vehicles. It's more associated with shields and that sort of thing. And it can cause concern when it shows up. So again, remember to trigger cool description. How are they able to avoid or otherwise baffle or interfere with the attacks that are being sent their way? Defense is definitely something that you want on your side. Stripped of everything cool, all an attack roll in a role-playing game is an opportunity to apply damage to a target. There's nothing descriptive or cool or evocative of a specific property like Star Wars in that point of view. So it's necessary when things get mechanical to remind yourself of everything that's going on around the characters. And that's where the additional combat modifiers section of Chapter 6, Conflict and Combat, comes up. Now, there are some very simple procedures in place, like how to adjudicate characters firing into a mix of PC and NPCs, allies and enemies who are in a cluster. How to resolve shooting into the group and model the concern about hitting allies instead of enemies, that kind of stuff. So you're learning how to think about applying the dice to a specific combat situation. And each factor, like things like smoke, things like gravity, things like vacuum, they are showing different ways to reflect how the situation will be harder for the character to do something, or how the situation will inflict some kind of condition upon the character. This is a very comprehensive section. While playing the game, it's unlikely that you will stumble across situations that are not in some way represented here. But if you do create or encounter a situation that isn't directly modeled in this section, the framework that they establish will help you make your own ruling in concert with the spirit of the system. How many setback dice should be applied, or how many boost dice should be applied, or what kind of damage code is appropriate, that sort of thing, so that you can rule with confidence and with a certain amount of speed. The section is not that long, but as I said, it's quite comprehensive, so you can get in tune with it very quickly, especially if you are paying attention, if you're being mindful of your surroundings, as we are taught in the films, and if your scenes incorporate a wide variety of environments and situations and conditions, smoke, fog, earthquakes, moving gantries and cranes, opening and closing blast doors, and this kind of stuff. If your scenes are more than just empty spaces with some combat going on in them, you will quickly get in tune with this part of this chapter and can, with aplomb and certainty, apply setback dice, upgrade and downgrade difficulty, apply damage, and so on, using this as your guide. As a general rule, I find that when using boost or setback dice as modifiers, it's good to remember that the modifiers for an individual condition or effect tend to be small, like 1 or 2. In an extreme case, 3. But there are sometimes many conditions which are operating within a scene, and you can include them. You don't have to focus on just the main one and say, well, there's a 1 modifier for this and there's a 2 modifier for that, and so I'll just make a 2 modifier. There are some games that work that way. This isn't one of them. The modifiers, the individual modifiers, are small so that you can bring in all the different effects from the environment. And as the game master, you are focusing on the scene, and you're allowing the players to focus on what they are bringing to that scene. What action are they going to take which might merit getting a boost die or might merit getting a setback die? What talents do they bring to bear? What gear do they have? All of these things. Allow them to recognize and explain, describe, and share what they can do in that scene. Don't ever let it become a habit. There are talents out there which add boost dice in very specific situations because of the career specialization that that character has. Don't just toss them in because you know they're there. Describe how the character is affecting the scene. There are talents which negate setback dice. Don't, as the game master, refuse to add them to the pool because you know they're just going to be canceled. Add them to the pool so that they can be canceled because of the description which is about to come in from the player. The setting up of the role, especially in a combat, is all about the visuals and the descriptions and who these characters are and what these characters can do. Don't let it become a habit. There is often debate or discussion about the probabilities behind the dice. Well, if you look, you'll see that the dice are skewed ever so slightly toward character success, with threat or some kind of disadvantage. Just slight. It's perceptible, which mirrors the movies, which reinforces the genre, and this is good. But as the game master, when you're deciding about adding boost dice or setback dice, or when as a player or game master you're thinking about dipping into the destiny pool to upgrade or downgrade a value in that pool, how can you decide? Well, for me, it doesn't really rest with probability. The tool of the dice pool is putting elements in and determining how they interact with each other. That's the crux of it. So if I'm adding a boost die, I'm looking to increase the chance for success and advantage. If I'm adding a setback die, I'm looking to increase the chance for failure and threat. If I'm upgrading, I'm looking for the opportunity to increase or maybe add the possibility of triumph. If I'm upgrading the difficulty, then I'm looking toward an increased possibility of despair, or adding the possibility of despair to these proceedings. Again, choosing to downgrade has the opposite effect. I'm reducing the likelihood of triumph or despair in that particular role. Long, long ago, in a galaxy far, far away it now seems, we talked about damage and the obligation of the game master and the players to roleplay and describe that damage. And as we finally reach the end of this lengthy video, it's time to finish off that part of the discussion. There are more things than simply points of damage in this game, and they're much easier to bring into the narration, but they're quite potent and they need to be talked about separately. So what we're talking about really are conditions. But before we get there, let's recap the states of health. You can be uninjured, which is great. You can be injured, which is where we need to bring in our creative description of that injury because there's no mechanical aspect for the injury. Then there's critical injuries, which we derive from the chart. We have a separate video on critical injuries. And these remain until specifically treated. So you can recover from the point value of an injury, yet still be carrying a critical injury. In concert with that, even if a critical injury that your character has sustained has expired, such as a setback die was added to your next turn, and that's it, that's the extent of the critical injury, you are still critically injured until that critical injury has been specifically dealt with. It will still affect subsequent critical injury rolls against you, even if your current status is unwounded. Right? So these details are important. Having access to good medical care is hard at the edge of the Empire, is maybe challenging in the midst of a battle in Age of Rebellion. And if you're on the run as some kind of, force sensitive with not a single friend or ally in the galaxy, that can be an interesting story challenge. Something to worry about before it happens, something to be upset about as it's occurring and as you're trying to find some kind of solution to it. But there are more conditions than just these. To list them out, they are staggered, immobilized, and disoriented. Staggered is a condition affecting the character where they are unable to take actions. They can still use maneuvers. They don't have an action at all, so they can't forfeit their action to take an additional maneuver or whatever. So they're able to stumble around, they're able to keep moving, but because of what has just occurred, they can't focus enough to do a complicated action. The partner to staggered is immobilized. Instead of removing the ability to take an action, however, immobilized removes the ability to take maneuvers, including spending strain for an additional maneuver. Simply cannot take maneuvers. Now this leaves open the ability to take actions. You're just not going anywhere while you do them. Finally, we have disoriented. Disoriented is the addition of setback die to the character. They can still act, they can still take maneuvers, they can still downgrade actions to maneuvers, they can still take strain to take an additional maneuver. However, everything that they do that requires a roll will have a setback die added to it because they are disoriented. Now these conditions, staggered, immobilized, and disoriented, are typically applied by gear. You're most commonly going to find them applied by gear. So staggered is a result of the concussive item quality. So a grenade with concussive goes off. Characters caught in the blast become staggered. Disoriented is the result of the disorient item quality. Immobilized may be caused by conditions such as, being trapped in mud like quicksand, being bound, the glop grenade, things like that. The character cannot take maneuvers. The duration for these effects is very important. The duration will be set by the source. So, for example, if you have an item quality concussive on a weapon, it will describe then how long the effect of staggered lasts. If you can't find it, if it's not listed, if it's a condition you're applying yourself because of a situation, the duration tends to be until the end of the character's next turn. So they have long enough to enjoy the experience of having one of their core abilities taken away, but not so long that they just get hammered on endlessly by opponents. Remembering also the concept of the glass cannon. Characters simply cannot just lie there and absorb punishment. Likewise, an extended duration of not being able to act can produce frustration. It's fine to frustrate the character. It's a problem if you're frustrating the player. Now, repeated detonations of concussive are going to result in extended durations of staggered. Likewise, being caught in a barrage of glop grenades with their ensnare quality is going to result in a long period of being immobilized. That's something with which the player, through the character, will have to deal. Right? Not getting caught by the glop grenade would be a great place to start. But the point here is arbitrarily adding a long duration of these conditions will have deleterious effects on your combat experience. It's something to consider. Tangentially related to damage and damaging effects and conditions, and directly related to the combat experience, are two things. 1, fear. 2, the adversary talent. The rules for fear are found in the Game Masters chapter. They're kept separate from everything else, and they feel very much like an optional rule. There are members of the role-playing community that object pretty strongly to the mechanization of an emotional response within their character. Although in the hobby this goes way, way, way back to some of the earliest initial waves of games following Dungeons & Dragons, Pendragon being a primary example. It hasn't achieved a high level of acceptance among the community at large, let's put it that way. Being told your character's afraid now and you have to do this affects some people's experience of play. Now, it can also affect people very positively. I'm a player, for example, that enjoys personality and emotion mechanics in the games that I play. So you'd think I would use the fear mechanic a lot, but in the campaign I'm lucky enough to be a part of, the players that I'm with, well, they don't shy away from recognizing that there are things that are in our game that terrify them, and they act accordingly. So we don't really need to go to the fear roll very often, and when we do, it's quite dramatic, and applying the effects is interesting. Now, the more you play with the Force, the more you have Force users, the more important the fear mechanic becomes. And it's not something to shy away from, even if your player characters are, really role-playing the broad panoply of the human emotional experience. Fear is something that the character can't control feeling, but it is something that they can try to control once it blossoms within them. Fear is countered by discipline, or in some cases is countered by cool, and that is something to keep in mind as well. The fearful experience occurs. We check for fear, and characters resist it as a part of their training and a part of their own emotional core, who they are as people. This becomes a focal point within the scene. We can see Luke in the films dealing with his fear. We can see in the prequels, we can see fear eating at Anakin. We can see its effects on Padme. We can see its effects on Obi-Wan. Fear is an important part of the Star Wars universe. While it is something to think of as an optional rule mechanically, it should be a part of play, I feel. And the mechanic provided in the Game Masters chapter is not so crushing that a player should feel like they can't act. Instead, it's something for them to work through, overcome, remember, worry about, and it, through the application of setback dice or the alteration of the amount with which they can act, or causing a rout, things like this, it has an effect on the scene. It has an effect on gameplay, a short-term story-related effect from which character and characterization can build. Fear is important. As a warning, though, it can frustrate or upset some players. So that's all part of talking to your players when you introduce new concepts, explaining them, getting their reactions, and working things out. But unlike some experiences where it's a hammer saying, okay, now you are afraid, ha ha ha, and I'm just going to keep asking for fear rolls to damage your fun. This sort of thing is supposed to enhance the experience. Keep that in mind first. Likewise, the adversary talent. The adversary talent makes it much harder for a character to attack an NPC. That's its purpose. It upgrades difficulties of incoming attacks on an NPC character. This is a ranked talent, so Adversary 1, Adversary 2, Adversary 3. Each rank of adversary upgrades the attack difficulty. That can be quite frustrating. Why does this guy have this ability to be harder to hit than me if we're in the same condition? And that frustration can make the game feel like it's unfair. The first time I introduced the adversary talent, I saw that flickering across the table. Why is this guy harder to hit than the rest of us? Well, after I explained what adversary is, that went away. But the danger is, the risk is, that you create a fully fleshed NPC with all of the talents and tools and gear that the PCs have, and then on top of that, give them adversary. Because that's not what adversary is for. Adversary is there to make your role as the game master faster, lighter, so you don't have to go through tree after tree looking for the types of talents, and you don't have to go through the gear chapter endlessly to find the type of equipment they would need to make them the threat they're supposed to be. Or you can use it to enhance a single adversary, a single opponent who is supposed to be some kind of threat, a character like Vader who operates on his own. But in game mechanics, it would be very difficult to stat a Vader-style character against a large group of PCs. They simply can't act enough to measure up. But the application of adversary can represent that higher level of skill and threat in a simple way without bogging down the game by, again, going through endless talents. Likewise, suggestions in Force and Destiny give you options similar to adversary, where you can provide them with extra actions or extra turns so that they will act more than once during the initiative cycle. The idea here is to up the threat but maintain the fairness and allow for scenes to occur that you see in the movies with a minimum amount of pressure and workload on the game master, because at the heart of everything, as we've said many times in this extremely long video, the description, the inroad to visualization for all of the players, that is the core of it. Rather than it being a tactical simulator with lots and lots of minute details that you can enjoy putting together to find out what the outcome will be. A big part of this is working together in concert to collectively imagine a thrilling Star Wars tale. That is quite filled with tactical and strategic and technical details. But those are sparks for description. So fear, which applies setback or upgrades the difficulty of action. Adversary, which upgrades the difficulty of attack actions against NPCs. These things, although they can seem like it, especially in a game that focuses so much of our attention on the narrative, on the development of story, these things can seem like ways to protect story elements such as important NPCs, and that tends to be a road to frustration, especially if there are older gamers in your group or there's a mix of people with older gaming sensibilities and newer gaming sensibilities together. The idea of overcoming obstacles is a core part of early gaming, and the idea of crafting stories or being a part of a story arc is an important element of newer stories. And this game is one of the few games out there that allows those two perspectives to blend together. But the item that does this is the dice. The thing that links both sides together is the dice. We can simulate all of the elements of the tactical, emotional, gear-related elements, environmental-related elements. We can simulate all of those in the dice and then let go of our attachment to the outcome. We can give up shaping what comes and narrate from the results. So a talent like Adversary or a condition applied to a character like Fear is not there to apply story protection to something that the game master is trying to bring about. It's there to provide the challenge that that character would represent, either just from an interesting point of view as a challenge for the characters to overcome, or to model the challenge that person represents in the universe in which your characters operate. It's perhaps a difficult concept to envision, but once you grasp it, the frustration that can appear when a character has to operate under the burden of fear, or when the character finds that they're up against an Adversary 2 opponent, that frustration is not what we want. What we want is the thrill, the excitement, the drama, that moment of terror when the Emperor's guard sweeps into a docking bay, that moment of fear when someone is saying, Boba Fett, Boba Fett. The idea of the adversary with the game master's processing power freed from looking at a complicated character sheet, instead simply be able to apply adversary. Or when the Rancor growls beneath the Hutt's throne room, apply fear. So, more than an hour of talking about combat. These are some of my observations on combat in Star Wars from Fantasy Flight Games. If you've been running the game, if you've been having combats and having good experiences or bad experiences, let's talk about them in the comments. And if you've made it this far, you're a tough one.